blizzard had come out of nowhere, a malevolent force intent on swallowing everything in its path. Visibility was next to nothing, and the GPS had lost signal hours ago. Yet, I pressed on, the thought of spending the night out here more terrifying than any storm. I was on my way to deliver a shipment that couldn't be delayed. My boss had warned me about the mountain pass, calling it a shortcut that few dared to take even in the best conditions. But with the main roads closed and my schedule tight, it seemed like the only option. A decision I regretted with every mile I conquered in this relentless white hell. As I rounded a particularly narrow bend, the headlights caught something up ahead. A vehicle, abandoned, its lights still on, casting an eerie glow that barely penetrated the swirling snow. It was a curious sight, and every instinct told me to drive on, to leave whatever misfortune had befallen its occupants to the rescuers. But then a deeper part of me, one honed by years of solitude on the road, couldn't leave it be. What if someone was in trouble, maybe even hurt? I brought my rig to a halt, the silence that followed the engine's cut-off more deafening than its steady rumble. Pulling my coat tighter, I stepped out into the blizzard, the cold biting at every inch of exposed skin. The wind was a physical force, pushing me back as I made my way to the stranded vehicle. It was a small car, a sedan, completely out of place in this wilderness. The driver's door was ajar, and as I peered inside, I found it empty. No signs of a struggle, no belongings left behind, just an eerie emptiness and the keys still in the ignition. The engine was dead, likely killed by the cold. It didn't make sense. Where had the occupants gone in such a severe storm? That's when I heard it, a faint cry over the howl of the wind. It was coming from further up the road, a desperate, human sound that had me back in my truck and driving towards it in seconds. The visibility was getting worse, but the cries grew louder, more urgent. I was close. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the snow, staggering towards the road. I slammed the brakes, barely stopping in time. It was a woman, her face red and raw from the cold, clothes barely enough to keep anyone alive in this weather. I hurried her into the warmth of my truck, blasting the heater to its maximum. Through chattering teeth, she told me a tale that sent shivers down my spine, and it wasn't from the cold. They'd been driving to a family reunion when they took this shortcut, her husband and 2 kids with her. But when the blizzard hit, they got stuck. Her husband had gone out to find help, taking one of the kids with him, leaving her with the youngest. When her child wouldn't stop crying, desperate to go after their dad, she'd reluctantly followed, only to find herself lost in the storm. And here she was, but her family was still out there. Before we could decide on our next move, a loud thump against the side of the truck made us jump. It was followed by another and another, a rhythmic banging that seemed too deliberate to be the work of the storm. I peered into the rearview mirror, and in the brief glow of the tail lights I saw them, figures barely human in shape, moving through the storm as if it was nothing. We were not alone in the blizzard, and whatever was out there, it wasn't just fighting to survive the storm. It was hunting. The realization that we were not alone sent a jolt of fear through me. The woman, noticing my tense expression, pressed her face against the glass, her eyes widening in terror at the sight of the shadowy figures circling our truck. The storm, relentless as ever, seemed to conspire with these unknown assailants, cloaking their movements and intentions. I knew we had to get out of there, to push through the storm, no matter the risk. The road ahead was treacherous, but staying put was a certain death sentence, either at the hands of the storm or whatever was outside. With the engine still running, I shifted into drive, my hands gripping the steering wheel with determination. The woman beside me whispered a prayer, her voice barely audible over the howl of the wind. As we started to move, the figures outside became more aggressive, their thumps against the truck growing louder, more desperate. But the snow beneath the tires held firm, and slowly we began to gain traction, the truck lurching forward into the blizzard. The figures faded into the white, their cries lost to the storm. We drove in silence, The only sound the roar of the engine and the occasional crackle of ice beneath the tires. The woman, still shivering from the cold, finally broke the silence with a question that had been haunting me since we found each other. "Who do you think they were?" she asked, her voice trembling. I didn't have an answer for her. The mountain was known for its legends and ghost stories, tales of lost travelers and ancient spirits that roamed the woods, but I'd always believed them to be just that, stories. Now, faced with the inexplicable, I wasn't so sure. The hours passed, and eventually the storm began to lessen, the fierce winds dying down to a gentle whisper. By the time dawn broke, the sky was clear, the mountain pass revealed in all its silent, eerie beauty. Ahead we saw the lights of a search and rescue team, their presence a beacon of hope in the aftermath of the night's terror. We were safe, or as safe as one could be after such an ordeal. The woman was reunited with her family, her husband and children having been found by another team hours earlier. They embraced, tears of relief freezing on their cheeks in the cold morning air. Story 2. The hum of the engine was a constant companion on the long stretches of highway that crisscrossed the country. I've made this trip more times than I can count, each journey blending into the next in a blur of asphalt and roadside diners. But this trip was different. It started like any other, with the sun rising in the east as I set off on another haul. The cargo was routine, the route familiar, but as I would soon find out, nothing about this journey would be ordinary. It was late afternoon when I saw him, a solitary figure standing by the side of the road, his thumb outstretched in the universal sign of the hitchhiker. I normally wouldn't stop. It's a rule most truckers live by, a precaution in a world that's increasingly unpredictable. But something about him made me slow down. Maybe it was the way he seemed so out of place in the middle of nowhere, or perhaps it was a sense of loneliness that mirrored my own. He climbed into the cab with a nod of thanks, dropping a battered backpack at his feet. He was younger than I'd first thought, with a face that seemed too old for his years, marked by a weariness that spoke of hard times. "Name's Tom," he said, offering his hand. I introduced myself in return, and we fell into an easy silence as the miles stretched out before us. At first, Tom seemed like any other hitchhiker, grateful for the ride and not too keen on sharing his life story. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the road, he began to talk. His voice was low, each word measured, as if he was weighing the cost of every confession. He spoke of places he'd been, of people he'd met along the way, and of the shadows that seemed to follow him. At first, I took it for the ramblings of a troubled soul, the kind of stories you tell to pass the time. But as he delved deeper into his past, revealing details of events that sent a chill down my spine, I began to realize that Tom was no ordinary traveler. There were gaps in his story, pieces he glossed over or avoided altogether, and it was in these silences that my unease grew. There was something he wasn't telling me, a darkness that lurked just beneath the surface of his words. I tried to convince myself that it was just the isolation of the road getting to me, that there was nothing to fear from a lone hitchhiker. But as night enveloped us, the atmosphere in the cab shifted. The friendly stranger who had climbed into my truck was gone, replaced by someone or something else. Tom's demeanor changed, his casual indifference giving way to an intensity that bordered on fanaticism. He spoke of a destiny that awaited him, of a purpose that drove him forward, and of the sacrifices that had to be made in pursuit of his goals. I realized then that I had made a grave mistake in picking him up. The open road, once a symbol of freedom and opportunity, had become a trap, and I was caught in a game of cat and mouse with a hitchhiker whose intentions were as dark as the secrets he harbored. The road ahead was shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from the truck's headlights as they cut through the night. Tom's stories had taken on a sinister edge, and I could feel the tension between us, thick as the fog that sometimes blanketed these lonely highways. I started to plan my next steps, trying to figure out how I could safely end this ride without provoking him. I suggested a rest stop, feigning a need for a break, but Tom insisted we keep driving. He said we were close to his destination, though he wouldn't say where that was. His insistence sent alarm bells ringing in my head. I had to act, and fast. Using a bit of quick thinking, I lied about a mechanical issue that required immediate attention, pulling off at the next exit under the guise of checking the engine. As I stepped out, I kept one eye on Tom, who remained in the cab, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. This was my chance. I told him he'd have to hitch another ride, that I couldn't take him any further. His reaction was swift and terrifying. In a voice barely recognizable from the man who had first entered my truck, he vowed that our paths would cross again, that his journey was far from over. Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared in my life, he vanished into the night, leaving behind a chill that wasn't just from the cold air. I got back on the road, my mind racing. The encounter with Tom had shaken me, not just because of the immediate threat he posed, but because of the deeper, more unsettling questions it raised. Who was he really? What dark secrets did he carry, and what sinister intentions had driven him to cross my path? The rest of the journey passed in a blur. I delivered my cargo on time, but the sense of accomplishment I usually felt was absent. Instead, there was only a lingering unease, a feeling of being watched that I couldn't shake off. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of Tom began to fade, his presence in my life reduced to a dark tale to share with fellow truckers over coffee. But the sense of unease never fully left me. Sometimes late at night on some deserted stretch of highway, I'd find myself checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see his figure standing by the side of the road, thumb outstretched, waiting. The encounter with Tom had changed me. I became more cautious, less inclined to take risks. The open road, once a source of freedom and adventure, now felt like a place where danger lurked around every bend. I had survived my game of cat and mouse with a hitchhiker whose dark secrets I'd never fully understand, but the experience had left its mark. Story 3. The highway stretched before me like a dark ribbon, its surface gleaming under the moonlight. I've heard stories about this stretch of road, tales of accidents and mishaps that seemed more frequent here than anywhere else. Superstition or not, I couldn't shake off a sense of unease as I navigated the infamous route. It was supposed to be a routine late-night delivery, but the heavy silence and the absence of other travelers made it feel anything but routine. I was about halfway through when I saw an explosion of sparks ahead as metal screeched against asphalt. A car had swerved off the road, its front crumpled against a tree. Instinct took over. I pulled my truck to a stop and grabbed my flashlight, rushing towards the wreck in hopes of offering assistance. The scene was chaotic. The car was badly damaged, smoke billowing from the engine. I called out, asking if anyone was hurt, but the silence that followed was unsettling. As I drew closer, flashlight in hand, I realized something was off. There were no signs of passengers, no groans of pain or calls for help. The car seemed abandoned, yet the crash appeared fresh. That's when the trap was sprung. From the shadows emerged figures, their features obscured by the dark. They moved with purpose, a coordinated group that had clearly done this before. Panic surged through me as I understood the situation. I had stumbled into an ambush, a deadly trap set by a gang preying on lone travelers. The realization hit me hard. There were stories, of course, rumors of bands of thieves using fake accidents to lure in unsuspecting victims, but I had never thought I'd encounter one myself. I was alone, far from help, and I had walked right into their hands. Adrenaline fueled my actions. I turned to run back to my truck, hoping to lock myself in and call for help. But they were fast, faster than I had anticipated. One of them tackled me to the ground, the flashlight slipping from my grasp and rolling away into the darkness. As I struggled, I managed to catch a glimpse of my attackers. There was a coldness in their eyes, a ruthlessness that chilled me to the bone. They weren't just thieves, they were predators, and I was their prey. But I wasn't going down without a fight. Using every bit of strength and every trick I knew, I fought back, managing to break free from the grip of the one who had tackled me. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding as I made a break for my truck. The chase was a blur, a desperate dash for safety with the sound of my pursuers close behind. I slammed into the truck, locking the doors just as they reached it, their hands pounding on the windows, their faces twisted in anger and frustration. I started the engine, the truck roaring to life under my hands. With a glance in the rearview mirror, I floored the accelerator, leaving them behind in a cloud of dust. My heart was still racing as I put distance between us, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away, leaving a shaking mess in its wake. Story 4. The road had been unforgiving, with each mile seeming to stretch longer than the last. Surrounded by a dense forest that seemed to close in around me, I drove on, my truck's headlights piercing the darkness. I was on a tight schedule, but the serenity of the remote wilderness had a way of easing the usual tension in my shoulders. That was until I saw an old sign, weathered and worn by time, announcing the presence of a town I had never heard of. My curiosity piqued. I decided to take a detour. What harm could a quick look do? The town, if it could still be called that, was a collection of dilapidated buildings that seemed to sag under the weight of their own history. The silence was profound, the kind that presses against your ears in the absence of any sound. It was clear that no one had called this place home for years, if not decades. Despite the unease that began to claw at the back of my mind, my feet moved of their own accord, drawing me deeper into the heart of the abandoned town. As I wandered through the streets, my eyes caught sight of an old diner, its windows thick with dust, yet something compelled me to peer inside. There, in the gloom, I could just make out the shapes of chairs upturned on tables, as if waiting for patrons who would never return. It was then that I heard a faint whisper, so soft I thought I might have imagined it. But as I listened, it grew louder, a chorus of voices speaking words I couldn't understand. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, filling the air with an urgency that sent shivers down my spine. I turned to leave, my heart pounding, but the town had other plans. The way back was no longer clear. The streets I had walked down now twisted and turned in ways that defied logic. Panic began to set in as the reality of my situation dawned on me. I was trapped. Night fell quickly, the darkness almost palpable in its intensity. That's when they appeared, shadows flitting between the buildings, just at the edge of my vision. Whispers filled the air, telling tales of a town cursed by its own greed, a community that had turned on one another, spiraling into madness and violence until none were left. But their spirits remained bound to this place, and they were hungry for a life they could no longer possess. I realized then that the town was alive in its own way, a living nightmare fueled by the sins of its past. The shadows sought to ensnare me, to make me another lost soul wandering its streets. My only hope was to escape, to find a way out before the town could claim me as its next victim. The night stretched on, a relentless game of cat and mouse as I dodged the shadows that reached for me, their whispers growing ever more insistent. I searched desperately for an exit, a way to break free from the town's grasp. It was when I had almost given up hope that I found a path leading out of the town, so overgrown it was almost invisible. With the shadows at my heels, I ran, not daring to look back until I had emerged from the forest, the town hidden once again by the trees. I returned to my truck, the engine starting with a roar that had never sounded so sweet. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the town was watching, waiting for its next unwitting visitor. As the road unfurled behind me, distance growing between me and that haunted town, I couldn't shake the cold dread that clung to me like a second skin. The experience had been too real, too vivid to dismiss as mere imagination. I knew I had to warn others, prevent them from stumbling upon that cursed place as I had. But who would believe such a tale? A trucker claiming to have narrowly escaped a ghost town with a malevolent life of its own. The journey back to civilization felt longer than any I'd ever undertaken. Every shadow cast by the trees along the road seemed to hide sinister intentions. Every rustle of the wind whispered threats. It was only when the first lights of the nearest town came into view that I allowed myself to breathe a sigh of relief. I was safe, or so I thought. In the days that followed, I couldn't escape the memories of that night. They invaded my dreams, turning rest into an elusive specter. I started to see shadows out of the corner of my eye, even in broad daylight. Whispers followed me, indecipherable but filled with malice. It was as if part of the town had followed me back, a reminder of the horror I'd left behind but could never truly escape. Driven by a need for closure and understanding, I began to research the town. The task proved difficult. It was as if the place had been erased from the maps, its history a blank page. But I persisted, and finally I found a mention of it in an old newspaper archive. The town had been prosperous once, a thriving community nestled in the forest. But it had been torn apart by a series of tragedies: theft, betrayal, murder, each one more horrific than the last, culminating in a mass disappearance that left the town deserted. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The town wasn't just haunted by the past, it was a manifestation of the collective guilt and pain of its former inhabitants, a prison for their tormented spirits. And by entering it, I had become part of its legacy, a living witness to its curse. Determined to rid myself of the town's influence, I returned to the forest. I needed to face the nightmare head-on, to prove to myself and the spirits that haunted me that I was no longer their prisoner. The journey back was a battle against my own fears, each mile bringing me closer to the confrontation I both longed for and dreaded. When I reached the place where the town should have been, I found nothing but the forest, silent and undisturbed. Had it all been a hallucination, a product of isolation and fatigue? No, the memories were too vivid, too filled with terror. The town had been real, but it seemed it was content to remain hidden, a secret buried in the heart of the forest. I stood there for a long time, grappling with the remnants of fear and the relief that washed over me in waves. Eventually I turned back, leaving the forest and its ghost behind. The experience changed me, leaving scars that would never fully heal. But it also taught me the power of resilience, the strength to face the darkness and emerge on the other side. The road awaits, endless and unforgiving, but I drive on, carrying the story of the town that exists somewhere between reality and nightmare. A warning to those who wander, a testament to the survivors of places lost to time and memory. Story 5. The night was thick with fog, a white blanket that swallowed the world whole. I've driven through fog before, but nothing like this. It was as if the very air had turned to mist, dense and unyielding. The road ahead was barely visible, my truck's headlights struggling to pierce the gloom. I reduced my speed, the familiar hum of the engine a comforting presence in the oppressive silence. It was then that I saw them, a line of trucks, moving through the fog with ghostly precision. They drove without lights, silent shadows against the pale night. It was an eerie sight, one that sent a shiver down my spine. Yet, something about it, a curiosity or perhaps a sense of camaraderie with my fellow truckers, urged me to follow. As I fell in line with the convoy, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making a mistake. There was something off about these trucks, something that went beyond their silent progress and hidden lights. But the fog seemed to dull my senses, lulling me into a false sense of security as I drove on. The convoy led me away from the main road, onto a path I had never taken before. The further we went, the more isolated we became, the trees on either side of the road looming like silent watchers. It was then that the scenario began to unfold, a nightmarish revelation that I had stumbled upon something far more sinister than a simple convoy of trucks. We arrived at a clearing, the fog thinning enough to reveal a large, abandoned warehouse. The trucks came to a halt, and I watched, hidden by the fog, as figures emerged from the vehicles. They moved with purpose, unloading crates that bore no markings, their contents a mystery. It was clear that this was no ordinary delivery, but a clandestine operation dealing in goods that were, at best, questionable. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, I left my truck, moving closer to get a better look. That's when I saw the crate's content, partially uncovered by one of the figures. It was enough to freeze the blood in my veins, a glimpse of something so dangerous, so forbidden that it threatened not just my life, but my very sanity. Realizing the gravity of my situation, I knew I had to escape, to get away before I was discovered. But as I turned to leave, a figure stepped out of the fog, blocking my path. It was clear they knew I was there, that I had seen too much. My heart pounded in my chest, the threat of violence hanging in the air like a palpable force. With nowhere to run, I was faced with a choice: confront the nightmare head-on or succumb to the terror that threatened to engulf me. It was a decision that would test the limits of my courage, a moment that would define the rest of my life. With no option for retreat, I braced myself for confrontation. The figure before me, obscured by the fog and the dim light, seemed to consider his options, the silence between us charged with tension. Then, unexpectedly, he stepped aside, gesturing for me to follow. Confusion mixed with fear, but curiosity drove my feet forward, following him into the heart of the warehouse. Inside, the scene was one of organized chaos. More figures moved about, each performing their task with a sense of urgency. The air was filled with a sense of danger, of secrets too perilous to be brought into the light. The figure who had intercepted me guided me to a secluded corner, where a single crate sat apart from the rest, its contents concealed by a tarp. He pulled the tarp back with a deliberate movement, revealing the crate's contents. My eyes widened in shock at the sight, a mix of disbelief and horror washing over me. It was a device, unlike anything I had ever seen, its purpose unclear but its potential for destruction unmistakable. The man spoke, his voice low. "You understand now why secrecy is paramount. This is not mere cargo but a responsibility. We are not criminals but guardians, tasked with ensuring that such power does not fall into the wrong hands." The revelation was staggering. The convoy, the clandestine meeting, it was all part of a larger effort to protect humanity from the dangers represented by the device. My presence, there was no accident, it was a test, a measure of my integrity and my ability to face the unknown with courage. The weight of the situation settled on me, a mix of pride and fear. I was being offered a place among them, a chance to be part of something greater, but the risk was immense, the path fraught with danger and moral ambiguity. I took a deep breath, considering the choices before me. Joining them meant leaving my old life behind, embracing a world of shadows and secrecy, but turning away meant ignoring the call to protect, to serve a higher purpose. The decision was mine alone to make, and I made it with a heavy heart. I agreed to join them, to become a guardian of the hidden, a defender against the darkness. The man nodded, a gesture of acceptance and respect, before leading me back into the night. The convoy dispersed, melting back into the fog from whence it came, each truck a silent sentinel on its own secret mission. I returned to my truck, my mind reeling from the night's events. The road ahead was no longer just a path of asphalt and destinations, but a journey into the unknown, where the lines between right and wrong blurred in the service of a greater good. As I drove away, the fog seemed to lift, both literally and metaphorically. The night's terrors faded into memory, but the sense of purpose they instilled in me remained. I was no longer just a truck driver, but a keeper of secrets, a warrior in an unseen battle for the fate of humanity. Story 6. The job had come in like any other, with a pickup and drop-off location, and a warning to not look into the cargo. It wasn't unusual in this line of work to be told to mind your own business, but something about this job felt different. The pay was too good, the client too anonymous, and the cargo, well, it was a mystery wrapped in a thick, unyielding tarp. I'd been on the road for hours, the monotony of the highway only broken by the occasional passing vehicle. The night was pitch black, the kind where the darkness seemed to press against the windows, seeking entry. It was then that it started small at first, a strange static coming through the radio that I couldn't tune out, followed by an inexplicable chill that permeated the cab. I shrugged it off as fatigue, the mind playing tricks after too long on the road. But then, the cargo started to shift. Not the usual settling of goods, but a deliberate, rhythmic thumping from the back of the truck. I pulled over, heart racing, convinced I'd find an explanation. Maybe the load wasn't secured properly, or an animal had somehow gotten trapped inside. The inspection revealed nothing out of the ordinary. The cargo was as I'd left it, securely fastened and undisturbed. Unease settled in my stomach as I climbed back into the driver's seat, the sense of being watched crawling up my spine. As I continued down the highway, the phenomena escalated. Shadows flickered at the edge of my vision, disappearing when I tried to focus on them. The temperature dropped so suddenly that my breath fogged the air. And the whispers started, voices so faint I was convinced I was imagining them. I was isolated, miles from the nearest town, with only my cargo for company. The realization that whatever was happening was connected to the mysterious load I was hauling hit me like a physical blow. I had to know what I was carrying, to understand the force that was now a very real threat to my survival. Against my better judgment, I pulled over and made my way to the back of the trailer. The decision to uncover the cargo felt like a betrayal of my professional ethics, but fear had overridden any sense of duty. I removed the tarp with trembling hands, bracing myself for the worst. Beneath the tarp was a collection of boxes and crates, none of which gave any indication of their contents. It was disappointingly mundane, and for a moment I allowed myself to believe I had been working myself up over nothing. But as I turned to leave, a box that I had not noticed before caught my eye. It was old, the wood rotted in places, and it was covered in symbols that seemed to shift and move in the corner of my vision. Drawn by an inexplicable pull, I opened the box. Inside was an object wrapped in an old, stained cloth. As I unwrapped it, the air grew colder, and the whispers louder. It was a statue, ancient and malevolent, its eyes seeming to bore into my soul. The moment I touched it, the world went silent. The whispers stopped, the chill disappeared, and for a moment everything seemed normal. But it was the calm before the storm. The statue was the source of the phenomena, an artifact of untold power and malevolence, and now it was awake. Realizing the gravity of my situation, I knew I had to act quickly. The statue, now revealed in all its eerie detail, seemed to pulsate with an ancient energy. I couldn't explain how I knew, but I was certain this object was the source of the terrifying phenomena plaguing my journey. The once mundane task of hauling cargo had turned into a nightmare scenario with me trapped in the starring role. With the statue uncovered, the disturbances intensified. Objects within the truck began to move on their own, propelled by an unseen force. The temperature fluctuated wildly, and the whispers grew into voices, their words now clear and demanding. They spoke of darkness, of a power long forgotten, and of a debt owed that needed to be repaid. I was in over my head, but the resolve hardened within me. I had to rid myself of the statue, to put an end to the nightmare. But it wasn't going to be easy. The voices, the entities bound to the artifact, weren't going to let their vessel go without a fight. They had chosen me, a lone trucker on a desolate stretch of highway, to be their next pawn in whatever game they were playing. I decided the only course of action was to return the statue to its box and find a way to seal it, to contain its power, until I could find someone more knowledgeable about these matters. Using gloves to avoid direct contact, I carefully wrapped the statue and placed it back into its crate, but as soon as I did, the truck's engine roared to life on its own, the headlights flickering erratically. It was clear the entities didn't appreciate my attempt to contain them. The truck started to move, guided by an unseen hand, speeding down the highway with increasing velocity. I struggled to regain control, the steering wheel resisting my grip, as if fighting against my efforts. In a desperate bid for freedom, I remembered an old church I'd passed a few miles back, its dilapidated steeple barely visible in the moonlight. Churches, I hoped, still held some power against such darkness. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. With all my strength, I managed to steer the truck toward the church, the voices screaming in protest as I did. As I approached, the phenomena reached a fever pitch, the air crackling with energy. But as the truck crossed onto the church grounds, everything stopped. The silence was immediate and profound, a stark contrast to the chaos that had just ensued. Taking no chances, I removed the crate from the truck and carried it to the church's doorstep. I didn't know if this would work, but I had to try something. With a final look at the crate, I left it there, hoping that the ground hallowed by faith would be enough to contain the darkness within. As I drove away, the weight of the night's events weighed heavily on me. I was no hero, just a trucker who had found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time. But I had survived, and in doing so, had perhaps prevented something far worse from happening. The road ahead was still long, and the night was not yet over, but the worst, I hoped, was behind me. I had faced an unseen and deadly force and lived to tell the tale. The mystery of the cargo had been unraveled, not completely, but enough to know that some things are better left undiscovered. Story 7. The sun had long since set, and the endless miles of road had begun to blur together when I saw the sign for the diner. It promised hot food and a warm welcome, a beacon of light in the otherwise pitch-black night. The place looked quaint, the kind of roadside establishment that offered more character than the sterile franchises dotting the highways. Grateful for a chance to stretch my legs and grab a bite, I pulled into the parking lot, the gravel crunching under the tires of my rig. Stepping inside, the diner was everything it had promised from the outside and more. The smell of coffee and fried food filled the air, and a jukebox in the corner played soft, comforting tunes from decades past. The waitress greeted me with a smile, guiding me to a booth by the window. The menu was simple but appealing, and I ordered without hesitation, my stomach rumbling in anticipation. As I waited for my meal, I took in the details of the diner. It was cozy, with a warmth that seemed almost too perfect. The other patrons were a mix of locals and travelers like myself, all seemingly at ease in this little haven. It was exactly what I needed, a brief respite from the loneliness of the road. However, as the minutes ticked by, a sense of unease began to settle over me. It started with small things, whispers between the staff that fell silent whenever I looked their way, glances from the other diners that lingered too long, an undercurrent of tension that belied the diner's welcoming facade. My meal arrived, and with it, a growing realization that something was very wrong. The food, though appearing delicious, carried a strange aftertaste, and the coffee seemed to dull my senses rather than sharpen them. The feeling of being watched intensified, and when I tried to strike up a conversation with the waitress, her responses were evasive, her smile forced. Deciding it was time to leave, I reached for my wallet, only to find the waitress blocking my path. "Why don't you stay a bit longer?" she suggested, her tone leaving no room for argument. It was then that I noticed the exits were being subtly guarded by some of the larger patrons, their expressions uninviting. Panic surged as the trap became apparent. The diner, with its cozy facade, was a snare, and I was the prey. But why? What did they want from me? The answers seemed to lie just beyond my grasp, obscured by the increasingly foggy thoughts clouding my mind. Determined not to become a victim, I feigned compliance while silently searching for a way out. The window by my booth offered a glimmer of hope, a potential escape route if I could just reach it without drawing attention. As the minutes passed, the diner's sinister nature became increasingly evident. The other patrons were not here by choice, their resigned expressions a mirror to my own growing despair. It was clear that leaving this place would not be simple or safe, but staying was not an option. The thought of what might happen if I didn't escape spurred me into action. With a plan forming in my mind, I waited for the right moment, my eyes fixed on the window that represented my only chance at freedom. The tension was palpable, a silent battle of wills between me and the diner's inhabitants. It was a game of cat and mouse, and I was determined not to be caught. Seizing a moment of distraction, I made my move. A sudden commotion at the far end of the diner provided the perfect cover, and with a swift motion, I pushed through the window, the glass shattering with a noise that seemed to freeze time. The cold night air hit me like a slap in the face, the stark contrast to the diner's warmth snapping my senses back to full alertness. I landed outside, the rough gravel scraping my hands and knees, but I didn't pause to assess the damage. I could hear shouts from inside the diner, the inhabitants alerted to my escape. Adrenaline fueled my legs as I sprinted towards my truck, the keys clenched tightly in my hand. As I reached the truck, I dared a glance back. Figures spilled out of the diner, silhouetted against the light, their shapes twisted and menacing. There was no time to waste. I jumped into the cab, the engine roaring to life on the first turn of the key. The headlights illuminated the figures now giving chase, their eyes reflecting a malice that chilled me to the bone. With no thought other than escape, I slammed the truck into gear and floored the accelerator. The diner and its sinister inhabitants faded into the rearview mirror, swallowed by the night. My heart pounded in my chest, a drum beat echoing the terror and relief that coursed through me. The rest of the night passed in a blur. The road ahead was empty, a stark reminder of how isolated I had been, how vulnerable. The events at the diner replayed in my mind, each detail a puzzle piece that refused to fit into any logical explanation. What had been their intention? To rob me? To harm me? Or something far more sinister? As dawn broke, the first light of the morning felt like a lifeline, a promise of safety after the horrors of the night. I stopped at the first police station I found, reporting what had happened. But when they checked, the diner was gone, as if it had never existed. The officers chalked it up to fatigue, a trick of the mind on a long, lonely night on the road. But I knew what I had experienced was real as the scars on my hands and knees. The road would never feel the same to me again. Every diner, every isolated stop brought back a flood of memories, a reminder of the night I escaped from a trap set in the guise of hospitality. My journey continued, the miles stretching on, but the shadow of that night lingered, a ghost story of my own making, a cautionary tale about the dangers that lay hidden in the most innocuous places. The road is a strange companion, offering both freedom and peril in equal measure, a reminder that sometimes the greatest threats are not found in the darkness outside, but in the lighted windows that promise refuge. Story 8. The day had started like any other, with a destination, a delivery window, and a truck full of cargo. The route was familiar, a well-traveled path through quaint towns and sprawling countryside. But as I approached the small town of Crossroads, something felt off. The air was tense, charged with an energy that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. As I drove into town, the reason for the unease became apparent. The streets, usually bustling with activity, were eerily quiet, the silence broken only by the distant sound of shouting and the occasional crack of gunfire. I had unwittingly driven into the middle of a conflict, the town caught in the grip of a violent struggle between rival factions vying for control. There was no turning back. The narrow streets and tight turns made it impossible to maneuver the truck around. My only option was to push forward, to complete the delivery and get out before I became an unintended casualty of the town's unrest. With every block, the situation grew more dire. Barricades blocked the roads, forcing me into the heart of the conflict. Armed men roamed the streets, their eyes watchful and suspicious. I kept my head down, trying to appear as inconspicuous as possible, a mere truck driver caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. The address for the delivery was on the other side of town, a seemingly impossible distance given the circumstances. I navigated the truck through the chaos, avoiding confrontations and taking detours around the most intense fighting. It was a maze of violence and desperation, each turn bringing new dangers. As I neared the delivery site, the reality of my situation sank in. The town was tearing itself apart, and I was in the middle of it, an outsider with no stake in the outcome but my own survival. The factions, embroiled in their own battles, paid me little mind, but that could change at any moment. Then, without warning, my path was blocked by a group of armed individuals. They demanded to know my business, their weapons a clear threat. I explained the delivery, hoping to appeal to their sense of normalcy in the midst of madness. To my surprise, they let me pass, but not without a warning that the town was no place for outsiders. Finally, I reached the delivery site, a small business that seemed like an oasis of calm amidst the storm. The owner, grateful for the delivery despite the circumstances, helped me unload quickly. He shared his perspective on the conflict, a tale of long-standing grievances and power struggles that had finally boiled over. With the delivery complete, the challenge became getting out. The way I had come was no longer an option, the fighting too intense. The owner suggested a back route, less known and potentially safer. I thanked him, my heart heavy with the knowledge of what this town was enduring. As I made my way out of Crossroads, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief mixed with guilt. I was escaping, but the town and its people remained, caught in a cycle of violence that showed no signs of ending. The road ahead was clear, but the experience had left its mark. The conflict in Crossroads was a stark reminder of the fragile peace that exists in so many places and the ease with which it can be shattered. As I left the town behind, the sounds of conflict fading into the distance, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The road ahead was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos I had just escaped. My mind replayed the events, each moment a vivid reminder of the fragility of life and the devastating impact of violence on a community. The delivery had been made, but at what cost? The town of Crossroads, once a place of peace and community, was now divided, its streets battlegrounds for rival factions whose reasons for fighting seemed trivial compared to the suffering caused. As I drove, I reflected on my role in it all. Was I just a bystander, an unwilling participant caught in the crossfire? Or did my presence, my decision to push through and make the delivery, somehow contribute to this cycle of violence? The answers were not easy, the lines between right and wrong blurred by the complexity of the situation. The experience in Crossroads served as a sobering reminder of the power of choice and the impact of our actions, even in situations that seem beyond our control. It was a lesson in the importance of understanding, of looking beyond our own perspectives to see the humanity in others, even those we might consider our enemies. As the miles passed, the town became a memory, a chapter in the story of my life on the road, but the lessons learned would stay with me, a guide for navigating the complexities of a world where conflict is often just around the corner, hidden in the shadows of seemingly peaceful places. The road ahead was long, and I knew there would be other towns, other deliveries. But I also knew that I would approach each with a newfound awareness, a sensitivity to the undercurrents that shaped the lives of those I encountered along the way. Crossroads might have been just a small town caught in the throes of conflict, but it represented so much more. It was a microcosm of the wider world, a reminder of the work that needs to be done to bridge divides, to heal wounds, and to find a path toward peace. As I continued my journey, the truck's engine a steady hum beneath me. I carried with me not just cargo, but stories. Stories of resilience in the face of adversity, of the human spirit's capacity for both conflict and compassion. And it was these stories, more than anything, that would define my travels. A truck driver navigating not just roads, but the complexities of the human condition. Story 9. The night was clear, the moon a sliver of light against the dark canvas of the sky. I had been on the road for hours, the monotony of the highway a familiar companion. My GPS system, always reliable, guided me through the night, a technological beacon in the vastness of the open road. But tonight, something was different. It started with small glitches, the screen flickering momentarily before returning to normal. I attributed it to a temporary loss of signal, a common enough occurrence in more remote areas. But as I continued, the glitches became more frequent, the directions increasingly erratic, leading me off the main route onto a side road that I didn't recognize. Concerned but curious, I followed the new path, the landscape around me growing more desolate with each mile. The road was narrow, the dense forest on either side a dark blur in the truck's headlights. It was then that I realized the gravity of the situation. My GPS had led me into a trap, a desolate area far from the safety and familiarity of the highway. Panic set in as I tried to retrace my steps, but the road seemed to twist and turn on itself, a maze with no clear exit. The GPS was no longer a guide but a saboteur, its instructions a garbled mess of commands that made no sense. As I navigated the confusing terrain, the first of the threats emerged. Shadows moved in the forest, shapes that were too deliberate, too purposeful to be mere animals. I caught glimpses of figures watching from the darkness, their intentions unclear but undoubtedly sinister. The realization hit me like a cold wave I was not alone. The technological glitch, whether by malice or malfunction, had led me into a survival horror scenario, facing threats both human and possibly technological in origin. With no way to call for help, my only option was to keep moving, to find a way out of this nightmare. The truck, my lifeline, became a fortress on wheels, its doors locked, windows up, as I navigated the treacherous road. But the threats were not just external. The GPS system, once silent, began to emit strange noises, whispers that seemed almost human, urging me deeper into the desolate area. It was as if the technology itself had turned against me, a puppeteer pulling the strings in a deadly game of cat and mouse. Determined to survive, I pushed on, each turn a gamble, each mile a test of wills. The road seemed endless, a loop of fear and uncertainty that offered no respite, no hint of escape. The figures in the forest grew bolder, their presence a constant reminder of the danger lurking just beyond the reach of the headlights. As the night deepened, my situation grew increasingly dire. The strange occurrences on the GPS had escalated into a full-blown technological haunt, its screen flickering with images and coordinates that led nowhere, a digital labyrinth designed to confuse and disorient. My attempts to shut it off were futile. It seemed to operate on its own volition, a ghost in the machine with a malevolent purpose. The realization dawned on me that I was dealing with something far beyond a mere glitch or sabotage. It was as if the very technology I had relied on for safety and direction had become an entity with its own sinister agenda. The whispers from the GPS morphed into intelligible threats, chilling my blood with promises of doom. Despite the overwhelming urge to give in to fear, my resolve to survive only hardened. I remembered an old, barely used service road I had spotted on a physical map years ago, one that might lead me back to the main highway. Relying on memory and instinct, I steered the truck away from the path dictated by the possessed GPS, venturing into the unknown. The decision proved to be a double-edged sword. The figures in the forest, perhaps emboldened by my apparent defiance, emerged from the shadows, their identities obscured by the night. They were no ordinary thieves or drifters. Their movements were too coordinated, too precise. It was as if they were part of the trap, flesh and blood extensions of the technological nightmare I was ensnared in. But it wasn't just the human threats that pursued me. The truck itself began to act out, its systems flickering on and off, the dashboard lights blinking in an erratic Morse code of madness. It was a battle not just against the entities outside, but against the very machine that was supposed to be my escape. In that moment of chaos, with every odd stacked against me, a clarity took hold. I understood that my survival depended not on technology, but on my own wit and will to live. I drove with a reckless abandon, guided by the moon's light and the deep primal instinct to survive. After what felt like hours, the service road finally emerged, a narrow gravel path that promised salvation. The truck, as if sensing the end of the ordeal, steadied itself, the dashboard's frantic lights calming as I made the turn onto familiar ground. The first light of dawn was breaking as I reached the main highway, the night's horrors receding like a bad dream. The GPS system, silent now, offered no explanation for the night's events. It screamed blank and unresponsive. I stopped at the first town I came across, the truck idling quietly as I stepped out into the morning light. The contrast between the night's terrors and the day's tranquility was jarring, a stark reminder of how quickly normalcy can be shattered. The ordeal had left me with more questions than answers. Was it a technological anomaly, a deliberate act of sabotage, or something more? The human figures in the forest, the truck's rebellion against its driver all suggested a coordinated attack, a warning perhaps of the dangers of relying too heavily on the very technology we believe keeps us safe. As I resumed my journey, the sun rising in the sky, I knew that the road ahead would never be the same. The experience had changed me, a reminder of the thin veil between the ordinary and the extraordinary, the seen and the unseen, the explainable and the unfathomable. Story 10. The job had come through as they often did, a call in the early hours of the morning promising good pay for a straightforward haul. The client was new, a voice on the other end of the line I didn't recognize, but in this line of work, anonymity wasn't uncommon. The pickup location was a secluded warehouse on the outskirts of town. The cargo specified only as industrial equipment. I didn't ask questions I didn't need to. My job was to load, haul, and deliver, no more, no less. But as I left the warehouse, the sun just peeking over the horizon, I couldn't shake the feeling that this job was different. The cargo was sealed and marked with warnings of fragility, its contents a mystery hidden beneath layers of steel and tape. The route was straightforward, a day's drive through familiar territory. Yet the moment I merged onto the highway, the unease set in, a prickling sensation at the back of my neck. It started with the vehicles. Unmarked cars and vans, nondescript and seemingly benign, but their presence became a constant in my rearview mirror. Whenever I changed lanes, they followed. If I stopped, they stopped. It was subtle at first, easily dismissed as coincidence, but as the hours passed, their maneuvers grew more brazen, a silent pursuit that left no doubt I was being followed. Then came the messages. My phone, which I had used only to confirm the pickup, began to buzz with incoming texts from numbers I didn't recognize. They were warnings, veiled in ambiguity but clear in intent. Turn back one read. The cargo is not what it seems, said another. Each message was a puzzle piece, a clue to the nature of the mysterious load I was hauling. Panic began to take root, a gnawing fear that I had become a pawn in a game much larger and more dangerous than any routine delivery. The isolation of the road, once a solace, now felt oppressive, each mile a step further into the unknown. Determined to shed light on the situation, I made the decision to inspect the cargo. Pulling off into an abandoned rest stop, I broke the seal and opened the container. Inside, amidst the expected industrial machinery, was a crate that didn't belong. Unlike the rest, it was unmarked, its contents obscured by a heavy, locked lid. The discovery was a turning point, a clear sign that the cargo I was carrying was far more valuable or dangerous than I had been led to believe. The unmarked vehicles, the threatening messages, all pointed to a sinister truth hidden within that crate. Faced with the reality of my situation, I knew I had two options: continue to the destination, delivering the cargo and hoping for the best, or take a stand, uncover the truth, and possibly expose myself to even greater danger. The decision weighed heavily on me, a choice between duty and curiosity, safety and truth. Opting for the latter, I set out to uncover the identity of the unknown client and the true nature of the cargo. The journey became a race against time, not just to deliver but to survive. The unmarked vehicles were no longer just shadows in my rearview mirror, they were adversaries in a high-stakes chase that spanned highways and backroads alike. With resolve stealing my nerves, I dove deeper into the mystery. Each turn of the wheel, each mile clocked, brought a new revelation, peeling back layers of deceit and danger. The pursuit intensified, the unmarked vehicles now blatantly aggressive, their message clear: stop or suffer the consequences. But I couldn't stop. The messages on my phone had morphed from warnings to pleas for help, cryptic sentences that spoke of a dire consequence if the cargo reached its intended destination. It was evident that what I was transporting was coveted, its significance far beyond industrial machinery. I was caught in a web of intrigue, with factions unknown vying for what lay hidden in that unmarked crate. In a daring move, I decided to confront my pursuers. At a deserted stretch of road, I braked hard, forcing a confrontation. The vehicles skidded to a halt, and from them emerged not the hardened criminals I expected, but individuals as desperate and determined as I was. They were not my enemies, but rather unwilling participants in the same dangerous game, each with their own role forced upon them by the mysterious client. From them I learned the truth. The cargo I carried was a piece of technology, revolutionary and dangerous in the wrong hands. It had the power to change the world, for better or for worse, and we were all pawns in its journey from obscurity to the global stage. The realization brought a clarity of purpose. Together we devised a plan not just to deliver the cargo, but to ensure it fell into the right hands, those who would use it for the betterment of mankind rather than its detriment. The road ahead was fraught with peril, a labyrinth of challenges and choices. Yet the newly formed alliance between us, once adversaries, now united by a common cause, proved to be a formidable force. As we neared the delivery point, the final confrontation loomed. The client, their identity still shrouded in mystery, awaited, their intentions nefarious. It was a showdown not just of physical might, but of wits and wills, a battle for the future of the technology cradled within my truck. The culmination of the journey was intense, a clash that tested every ounce of our resolve. But in the end, righteousness prevailed. The technology was secured, the client's plans thwarted. The cargo, once a burden of unknown weight, became a beacon of hope. The aftermath left me changed. I had started the journey a solitary trucker, concerned only with the road ahead. But I emerged a key player in a story much larger than myself, my eyes open to the complexities and dangers of a world I had previously navigated without thought. As I drove away from the delivery point, the sun rising on a new day, I couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment mixed with trepidation for what the future might hold. The road ahead was once again open, the horizon wide and inviting. But the journey had taught me that beneath the surface of the mundane lay layers of complexity and intrigue, a world where every turn could lead to danger or discovery. The truck, my constant companion, hummed beneath me, a steady reminder of the adventure just past and the mysteries that lay ahead. The road, once a simple path from point A to point B, was now a canvas of possibilities, each mile a story waiting to be told. Story 11. I've always considered the endless highways my home, the hum of my truck's engine a comforting lullaby that's guided me through countless nights. But nothing could have prepared me for the chilling ordeal that awaited me in the heart of the desert, a place where the sun blazes unforgivingly by day, and an eerie silence envelops everything under the moon's watchful gaze. It was supposed to be just another run from Las Vegas to Phoenix, a route I'd driven so many times I could do it with my eyes closed. The desert stretched endlessly on either side, its vastness both beautiful and intimidating. As night began to fall, casting long shadows across the road, I noticed an unusual shape ahead. It was another semi-truck, abandoned at a strange angle off the side of the road. This was unusual in itself, but what caught my eye was the door hanging open, swaying gently in the breeze, as if beckoning me closer. Driven by a mix of curiosity and concern, I pulled over. The desert's silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of my footsteps crunching against the gravel as I approached the abandoned vehicle. The truck's exterior showed signs of a struggle. There were deep scratches along the sides, and one of the tires was flat, its rubber shredded. Hesitantly, I peered inside the cabin, half expecting to find someone in need of help. It was empty, except for a few scattered personal belongings. A chill ran down my spine as I realized something terrible might have happened here. My attention was then drawn to the cargo area. The lock had been tampered with, signs of forced entry clear as day. Pushing aside the heavy door, I uncovered a hidden compartment beneath the legitimate cargo. What I found sent a wave of dread through me. It was filled with illegal contraband, the likes of which could land someone in deep trouble. As I stood there trying to process my discovery, the unmistakable sound of shifting gravel behind me shattered the silence. I wasn't alone. Panic surged through me as I turned to face the source of the noise, only to find nothing but the empty desert stretching out into the darkness. My heart raced, every instinct telling me to flee, but a strange fascination held me in place. Who had left this truck here and why? And more importantly, where were they now? I decided to investigate the area for any clues that might explain what had happened. As I circled the truck, the beam from my flashlight caught something in the sand footprints leading away from the vehicle, disappearing into the desert. They were fresh, suggesting that whoever had been here might still be close by. The realization hit me like a freight train. I was in over my head. This wasn't just about an abandoned truck, it was about something far more sinister. I had unwittingly stumbled upon a dangerous secret, one that people would kill to protect. My thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise, the sound of an engine in the distance. Someone was coming. Story 12. The road ahead was infamous, a stretch so treacherous it had claimed more lives than the locals cared to count. Legends of ghostly apparitions and unexplained phenomena were whispered in hushed tones at truck stops, but I never put much stock in ghost stories. That was until I found myself navigating its winding path under the cloak of night, the full moon casting eerie shadows across the asphalt. As a truck driver, I'd faced my fair share of dangers, from treacherous weather to the unpredictability of other road users. Yet, nothing could have prepared me for what awaited me on that notorious road. The journey began like any other, with the hum of my truck's engine and the solitude of the open road for company. However, as I rounded a particularly sharp bend, the beams of my headlights illuminated a scene straight out of a nightmare. A vehicle, or what was left of it, lay in a crumpled heap, blocking the path ahead. Its twisted metal frame told tales of a violent encounter, the kind that leaves more questions than answers. With a sense of duty weighing heavily on my shoulders, I brought my truck to a halt and grabbed my flashlight, ready to offer assistance or call for help if there were any survivors. The silence that greeted me as I stepped out was unsettling. No cries for help, no whimpering of the injured, just the whispering of the wind through the trees that lined the road, as if nature itself was holding its breath. As I approached the wreck, the beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing details that made my blood run cold. There were signs of a struggle, not just an accident. The driver's side door hung open, the interior bathed in the soft glow of my flashlight. Splashes of blood stained the seats and dashboard, a vivid contrast to the darkness that enveloped us. It was clear that this was no ordinary crash, it was a violent confrontation that had spilled onto the road. As I scanned the surroundings, a chilling realization dawned on me. The perpetrator, whoever they were, might still be nearby, watching, waiting. The thought sent shivers down my spine, transforming the night's quiet into a symphony of imagined threats. Every shadow seemed to move, every noise a potential signal of my discovery. The urge to return to the safety of my truck was overwhelming, but a part of me refused to turn away. These were someone's final moments, a story that demanded to be heard, even if only by the indifferent stars above. It was then that I noticed something in the distance, a figure standing just beyond the reach of my light, still and silent as a statue. Panic gripped me, a primal fear of the unknown adversary who lurked in the darkness. Yet I stood my ground, the weight of the flashlight in my hand my only comfort. The figure made no move towards me, but the sense of being watched was palpable, a psychological game of cat and mouse on a stage set by fate. The road had always been a place of freedom for me, a means to escape the confines of a mundane life. But standing there, confronted with the aftermath of violence and the presence of an unseen foe, it became a prison. The road's notoriety was no longer just a story to me, it was a stark reality, a reminder of the fragility of life and the shadows that lurk just beyond the light. Story 13. It was well past midnight when I decided to pull into the old truck stop off Highway 29. The place was barely more than a dimly lit diner and a few diesel pumps, surrounded by a vast expanse of darkness. Exhausted from hours on the road, I looked forward to a hot meal and a brief escape from the monotony of the highway. As I settled into a booth with a view of my rig, I couldn't help but overhear a conversation between two locals at the counter. They were discussing the infamous stretch of Highway 29, just a few miles ahead, known among truckers and locals alike as the Phantom Mile. According to them, strange occurrences were common there, vehicles disappearing, ghostly hitchhikers appearing out of nowhere, and drivers being driven mad by unexplainable phenomena. I've always considered myself a skeptic. Ghost stories and urban legends were nothing more than entertaining tales to pass the time on long hauls. So after finishing my meal and stretching my legs, I climbed back into my truck, ready to dismiss the stories as nothing more than local folklore. The night was unusually dark, with a thick fog rolling in, limiting visibility to just a few feet ahead. As I approached the Phantom Mile, I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. I attributed it to the stories I'd just heard, chalking it up to my imagination getting the better of me. But then, things began to happen that I couldn't explain. My radio, which had been playing a clear signal, suddenly burst into static before turning off completely. The temperature inside the cab dropped sharply, my breath visible in the cold air. I turned up the heater, but it made no difference. As I pressed on, determined to not let my imagination get the best of me, I saw a figure standing on the side of the road, illuminated by my headlights. A hitchhiker, seemingly out of nowhere. Remembering the stories, I didn't stop, but as I passed, I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror. There was nothing there. The figure had vanished. I tried to convince myself that it was just a trick of the light or a shadow cast by the trees. But then came the whispers. Faint at first, they grew louder, as though someone was sitting right next to me in the cab. I could make out no words, just a constant murmur that seemed to fill the space around me. I was nearing the end of the Phantom Mile, the diner's lights now a distant memory, when my truck suddenly lurched. It felt as though something had grabbed it, trying to pull it off the road. I fought with the steering wheel, my heart pounding in my chest, as the unseen force relinquished its grip just as suddenly as it had taken hold. When I finally emerged from the Phantom Mile, the normal sounds of the night returned. The fog lifted, and the temperature in the cab returned to normal. I pulled over at the first opportunity, my hands still shaking from the ordeal. I've driven that route many times since, but never at night. Whatever I experienced on the Phantom Mile has convinced me that some legends are rooted in truth, and some stretches of road are better left untraveled after dark. The experience on the Phantom Mile haunted me long after that night. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even in the daylight. The whispers, the cold, the figure on the road, they all replayed in my mind like a nightmare from which I couldn't awaken. My skepticism had been shattered. I was now a believer in the inexplicable and the paranormal. In the weeks that followed, I found myself drawn to the stories of others who had traveled the Phantom Mile. Each account was different, yet eerily similar to my own. Vehicles stalling for no reason, sightings of ghostly apparitions, and the overwhelming feeling of dread seemed to be common themes. It was as though the stretch of road had a life of its own, preying on the fears of those who dared to traverse it. Driven by a need to understand what had happened, I began to research the history of the highway. I discovered that the road had been built over an old cemetery, the graves supposedly relocated before construction began. But rumors persisted that the relocation was never completed, that some of the dead were left behind, their resting places desecrated by the asphalt that now covered them. This revelation cast the stories of the Phantom Mile in a new light. Were the incidents a manifestation of the unrested spirits, a cry for acknowledgement or vengeance from beyond the grave? The thought chilled me to the bone, yet I couldn't deny the possibility. The paranormal events I'd experienced suddenly seemed less like random occurrences and more like desperate attempts at communication from the other side. I couldn't ignore the pull of the Phantom Mile. I felt a responsibility, not just to myself but to those who had suffered similar fates, to uncover the truth. I started by visiting the local library, poring over old newspapers and records, looking for anything that might shed light on the highway's dark past. My search led me to an old man, a descendant of one of the families whose ancestors had been buried in the cemetery. He told me stories passed down through generations, of spirits seen wandering the road at night, of voices carried on the wind, whispering the names of the forgotten. He believed, as did many others, that the disturbances on the Phantom Mile would continue until the lost graves were found and properly consecrated. Armed with this new knowledge, I approached the local authorities with my findings, urging them to investigate the possibility that the road was indeed haunted by the spirits of those disturbed by its construction. While many were skeptical, the sheer volume of incidents reported over the years could not be ignored. It took time, but eventually a team of archaeologists was brought in to survey the area. What they found was shocking: dozens of unmarked graves just below the surface of the Phantom Mile. The community was stunned, the truth of the road's haunted reputation now impossible to deny. Efforts were made to relocate the remains, with ceremonies held to honor the dead and put their spirits to rest. It was a long and painstaking process, but one that needed to be done. Since the reburial of the remains, reports of paranormal activity on the Phantom Mile have decreased significantly. Some say the spirits have finally found peace, while others believe they still linger, watching over the road that once disturbed their eternal rest. As for me, I've hung up my keys and retired from the road. The experience on the Phantom Mile has changed me in ways I can't fully explain. I've seen what lies beyond the veil of our understanding, and it's a world as fascinating as it is terrifying. I'm just grateful to have come through it with my sanity intact, a wiser, albeit more cautious soul. Story 14. In the wake of Hurricane Eloise, I was tasked with delivering emergency supplies to Ashton, a small town cut off from the world by the storm's devastating passage. The assignment sounded straightforward, but as I would soon discover, it was anything but. The journey promised to test not only my skills as a trucker, but my resilience in the face of adversity. As I set out, the weather had cleared, leaving behind a serene blue sky, a stark contrast to the chaos Eloise had wrought. The first leg of my journey was uneventful, roads clear and the landscape peaceful. It was a deceptive calm that lulled me into a false sense of security. As I approached the outskirts of the disaster zone, the magnitude of the devastation became apparent. Trees uprooted, homes reduced to rubble and roads washed away or blocked by debris. Navigating this new, treacherous terrain was a nightmare. My truck, though robust and well-equipped, struggled against the mutilated roads, and progress was painstakingly slow. It wasn't just the physical obstacles that made the journey harrowing. The disaster had brought out the worst in some, driving them to desperation or greed. I encountered looters, pillaging what remained of abandoned homes and businesses, their eyes hungry and devoid of humanity. At one checkpoint, a group of armed men tried to hijack my truck, thinking it carried valuables. It took all my negotiation skills and a few hidden emergency flares to convince them that my cargo was not worth their trouble. But the greatest challenge was the psychological toll. Everywhere I looked, there were reminders of the lives torn apart by the hurricane. I passed a school, its playground twisted and scattered, a silent testament to the children who once laughed there. In a field, I saw a family sifting through the wreckage of their home, their faces etched with loss and determination. These images haunted me, a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the indiscriminate nature of disaster. Despite these challenges, there were moments of hope. Communities coming together to rebuild, strangers helping one another find their way through the rubble. It was this spirit of resilience that kept me going, a beacon in the overwhelming darkness. After what seemed like an eternity, I reached Ashton. The town was a shadow of its former self, isolated and battered, but not broken. The relief on the faces of the townspeople as I unloaded the supplies was a reward greater than any I had received in my years on the road. I had delivered more than just food, water, and medical supplies. I had brought them hope. My journey back was reflective, the silence of the cab filled with the echoes of what I had witnessed. The experience changed me, leaving a mark as indelible as the one left by Hurricane Eloise on the landscapes I had traversed. I had seen humanity at its worst and its best face challenges I never imagined and emerged stronger for it. I've returned to the road since then, the highways and byways once again my home. But the memories of that journey remain, a reminder of the power of nature and the resilience of the human spirit. I carry them with me, a testament to the fact that even in the aftermath of disaster, there is hope. And sometimes the most important deliveries are not those measured in miles, but in the difference they make. In the weeks following my delivery to Ashton, the town began to show signs of recovery. Roads were cleared, buildings slowly rebuilt, and the community forged bonds stronger than ever before. My part in Ashton's story was small, but the impact it had on me was profound. The experience lingered in my mind, a constant companion as I traversed the country's highways. One particular aspect that stayed with me was the resilience of the human spirit. In Ashton, I had witnessed individuals coming together, each contributing what they could to the recovery effort. There were stories of heroism, of people risking their own lives to save neighbors, and of families sharing their last reserves of food with strangers. These stories became a source of inspiration, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is light. But the journey also left me with a sense of unease. The desperation I had seen in the eyes of the looters and the armed men at the checkpoint was a stark reminder of how quickly society's thin veneer could be stripped away by disaster. It made me wonder about the fine line between civilization and chaos, and how easily it could be crossed. This reflection led me to volunteer for more missions like the one to Ashton. I became part of a network of truckers who specialized in disaster relief, delivering supplies to areas hit by hurricanes, floods, and other calamities. Each journey was different, yet they all shared a common thread: the profound impact of witnessing the best and worst of humanity in the face of adversity. As time passed, my truck became more than just a vehicle. It was a lifeline, a beacon of hope to those waiting on the other end. The road, once a place of solitude and reflection, became a path to redemption, a way to make a difference in the world, one delivery at a time. Looking back, I realized that the journey to Ashton was not just about delivering supplies. It was about understanding the depth of human suffering and the indomitable will to overcome it. It was a lesson in humility, compassion, and the interconnectedness of our lives. We are all, in some way, travelers on the same road, facing storms of our own. What matters is how we navigate them and how we help others along the way. In the end, the nightmare of navigating through the devastated landscapes, confronting looters, and facing the psychological toll of the disaster's aftermath became a defining moment in my life. It taught me about courage, resilience, and the strength found in unity. These lessons, hard-earned on the road, have stayed with me, guiding me through life's challenges and reminding me of the power of hope and the human capacity for kindness. The road ahead is long and uncertain, but with the memories of Ashton and the lessons learned, I face it with a renewed sense of purpose. For in the heart of darkness there is always light, and sometimes it takes a journey through the storm to find it. Story 15. It was supposed to be just another run, another stretch of miles under my belt before calling it a night. I'd planned to stop at a secluded rest area off the interstate, a spot I'd used before, nestled away from prying eyes and the incessant noise of the highway. It was the perfect place to catch a few hours of sleep, or so I thought. As I pulled into the rest area, the first hint that something was amiss was the utter silence that enveloped the place. Normally you'd hear the distant rumble of engines or the soft murmur of conversation from other drivers taking a break. Tonight there was nothing. I chalked it up to odd timing and parked my rig in the usual spot. Grabbing my flashlight, I stepped out for a quick walk to stretch my legs and clear my head before settling in. That's when I saw a glint of something metallic in the beam of my flashlight, off the beaten path that led into the woods surrounding the rest area. Curiosity got the better of me, and I ventured closer, only to stumble upon a scene straight out of a nightmare. There, hidden among the trees, was a car, its trunk open to reveal a chilling sight: two bound and gagged individuals, fear etched into their eyes as they pleaded silently for help. My heart raced, adrenaline flooding my system as I realized I'd walked into a crime scene. Before I could process what to do next, I heard the muffled sounds of voices approaching. Panic set in. I was alone, unarmed, and completely exposed. In a split-second decision, I hid behind a nearby tree, my breath caught in my throat as two figures emerged from the shadows, talking in hushed, urgent tones. It became clear that they were the perpetrators, discussing their next move. I was in over my head, a witness to a crime I had no part in but now entangled within. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I needed to escape, to get back to my truck and get out of there before they discovered me. Sneaking away with the stealth of someone much more experienced in such matters, I made it back to my rig, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I couldn't just drive off. There were lives at stake, innocent people depending on me for their rescue. But I also knew I couldn't take on the criminals alone. My only option was to call for help without alerting the perpetrators. I dialed 911, whispering the situation to the operator, providing them with my location, and urging them to send help quickly. Then I waited, the longest and most agonizing minutes of my life ticking by as I kept an eye on the path leading to the hidden crime scene. The arrival of the police was like something out of a movie, silent but swift. They took the criminals by surprise, apprehending them without incident, and rescued the hostages from their grim fate. I watched from a distance, a silent guardian, until I was sure it was over. I gave my statement to the police, recounting everything I'd seen and heard. The officers thanked me, telling me I'd saved those people's lives, but I couldn't shake the feeling of sheer luck that I'd decided to stop there at that time. The event shook me to my core, a reminder of the darkness that lurks in unexpected places. I went back on the road, but with a newfound vigilance, aware of the impact a single person can have, for better or worse. The routine delivery turned into a harrowing ordeal that had ended, but the memories of that night lingered, a stark reminder of the fine line between normalcy and chaos. In the aftermath, as the police cleared the scene and the victims were taken to safety, the reality of what had transpired hit me like a freight train. I was no hero, I was simply in the wrong place at the right time, or perhaps the right place at the wrong time, depending on how you looked at it. The officers reassured me that my actions had indeed made a difference, but as I sat in my truck waiting for the all clear to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The drive away from the rest area was one of the longest of my life. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, and the quiet of the night was now a canvas for my imagination to paint fears onto. The incident had left a mark on me, a deep-seated awareness of the fragility of safety and the proximity of danger in our everyday lives. Days turned into weeks, and the event began to fade into the background of my mind, dulled by the monotony of the road and the passing of time. Yet, I found myself more vigilant, more aware of my surroundings, and more appreciative of the thin blue line that separates order from chaos. The experience also instilled in me a newfound resolve to be prepared for whatever the road might throw my way. I took self-defense classes, became certified in first aid, and made sure my truck was always equipped with emergency supplies. I wasn't just a trucker anymore, I was a survivor, someone who had faced the darkness and come out the other side changed but unbroken. Months later, I received a call from the police department that had handled the case. The criminals I had helped capture were convicted and sentenced for their crimes, thanks in part to my testimony and the evidence I had helped secure. The victims, now survivors, had begun the long process of healing, their lives forever altered but continuing forward with resilience and courage. The officer on the line thanked me again for my actions that night, telling me that the community was a little safer because of what I'd done. It was a small comfort, a glimmer of light in the shadow of the memories that still lingered. As I hung up the phone, I looked out at the open road ahead of me, a path that stretched into the horizon, filled with unknowns and what-ifs. I realized then that life, much like the road, is unpredictable, full of moments that can change us in ways we never anticipate. The routine delivery that turned into a harrowing ordeal had taught me more about myself and the world than I could have ever learned otherwise. It reminded me of the importance of courage, vigilance, and the impact one individual can have on the lives of others. As I set off down the highway, I carried with me the lessons of that night, a silent testament to the fact that sometimes being in the right place at the right time can make all the difference.